So, welcome to the third iteration of this episode. I recorded it once when I was just doing voiceovers, and then I re-recorded it when I got the camera. That episode's been up for about 5 days now, and now I'm re-recording it because I have a new addition to the collection that is too important to leave out of this episode. It's that important. And today's episode, we are going to talk about headgear. The history of headgear is a very fascinating aspect of all warfare, and it changes drastically from the 1800s into the 1900s, like wildly. And especially in the 1900s, headgear just changes every couple of decades wildly. Now, the pickelhaube changes the history of helmets forever. It is the, keystone in how helmet design changes for the next 150 plus years. It is that important. And that's not even an understatement. And we're going to talk about just how drastically the pickelhaube, changed not only the history of all the pickelhaubes after it, but the influence it had during its reign of being the best headgear of all time. Now, to understand the pickelhaube and why it was so important, we have to look a little bit before the pickelhaube and what, was the predecessor to it. And the predecessor to the pickelhaube is going to be this weird looking thing here, and that's a shako. These are tall felt hats. They have no protectional value whatsoever, and they dominate European armies at the start of the 19th century. And when I mean dominate, I really do mean like widely used. You would see these suckers everywhere. And they are commonly associated with France and the Napoleonic era armies. Like if you think of Napoleon, what the soldiers of Napoleon's army are wearing, they're wearing shakos. And they did have a purpose. They were not protective, but they really did serve a very good purpose. And this is mainly for two good reasons. And that's going to be, intimidation, and it's going to be communication. So the first one, intimidation, stems from if I am wearing a trifold hat, which the shako replaced, and I have everybody lined up wearing trifold hats, that doesn't necessarily look as scary to the enemy as a extra foot tall, shiny helmet that everybody is wearing. And when everybody in the line is wearing these extra foot of height helmets and they're super ornate, they're all wearing the same. That is infinitely scarier than a weird little trifold hat. And it would not only show unity within the unit, but it would also, show the enemies like, we are such a good army, we can supply our soldiers with these super over-the-top headgear pieces. So that's the first reason. Now, the second reason is communication. This is a time where battles are getting absolutely massive. We are talking tens of thousands of troops, huge battles spread across massive battlefields. And the commanders can't be with the unit at all times. They have to spread their time between each unit. But they have to figure out where their units are. So, instead of having trifold hats like the enemy has, you give your soldiers green shakos with, red bottom and white top fuzz. You can tell your soldiers from hundreds of yards away from the enemies. It gives you an easy way to identify your troops and be able to get communication down to them quickly. So that's the other reason as to why shakos were so dominant for a good while. Now, again, they offer no protection and they kind of also hurt the user. These are extremely tall felt hats, and felt absorbs water. So when it would rain, like it does in Europe all the time, these helmets would absorb the water, become super heavy, cause neck pain. Really not the best thing to wear. Now, after the shakos run their course, and nations kind of realize that, this isn't the best way to really, fight. Like, it's kind of over the top, it's expensive, it's, a multitude of different reasons. They decide to switch over to smaller caps, such as this one. This is a post-World War II kepi used for ceremonial units. But the French would have a variant of this for their soldiers, and it would look just like this color as well. And if you were an officer, it would look almost identical to this too. You can tell based off the gold. Now, these were a very big improvement compared to the shakos that were dominating a couple decades earlier. These are much smaller, much lighter. You can breathe a lot more in them, and overall, just much better. The United States moves to soft caps like you would see in the Civil War. Glory would be a good one. Denzel Washington, the like 4-hour Gettysburg movie. And then Stetsons, super cool cowboy hats. You see them in the Spanish-American War. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, moves to soft caps, which they use all the way until World War I. But they also move to pith helmets, which are, when you think of like African explorers, you're probably thinking of a pith helmet. And they're pretty good. They use pith helmets for a long time, especially in overseas theaters. And they, change them. They, add things to them. They refine them. I mean, they go on post World War II. They go on for ages. But primarily, you wouldn't see a lot of pith helmets in like the European armies. It was just like a foreign army thing. Now, you have all these different helmets coming out from the United States, the French, the British, and they're all fine, but they don't really offer any protection, really. Like, if I am wearing this, felt cloth helmet, helmets being generous at that, if I get shot, it is going through the head and out the other side like it's nothing. It offers no legitimate protection. But one nation decides, screw this, we are going to have some actual protection for our people. And they revolutionize headgear from that point on. Now, the nation that is going absolutely insane with all this influential and, soon to be incredibly important piece of headgear is Prussia. And Prussia is absolutely insane for just a multitude of different reasons. But basically what ends up happening with this new helmet is kind of up for debate for the early years of the helmet. It could have been influenced by a trip to Russia in the 1820s, where King Frederick IV goes and sees a spiked helmet, like an experimental helmet, on a workbench in Russia, and then he goes back to Prussia and tells his dad, King Frederick III, like, hey, I saw this thing. It was super cool. I think our soldiers would benefit from this type of helmet. And King Frederick III kind of says that it's a stupid idea and that it's going to cost too much and we're not going to do that. But then King Frederick IV, the one that sees this experimental helmet, takes over in 1840 and immediately gets the ball rolling on this spiked helmet that he has so dreamed of for like 20 years now. And in 1841, the first pickelhaubes are tested, and a newspaper compares these pickelhaubes to the days of knights. Now, a pickelhaube is not the original name that was given to these helmets. It's kind of like Advil. Like, we call Advil Advil, but really it's not called Advil. It's the brand name of Advil, if that makes any sense. Pickelhaubes in German just translate to spiked helmet. And a newspaper compares these new helmets to the pickelhaubes from the days of knights, other spiked helmets. But the name sticks, so then they just become pickelhaubes. But the difference between the pickelhaubes on the screen here and the pickelhaube from the days of knights is that these pickelhaubes are easily mass-produced. These are, one solid piece of metal body with a spike and then a front plate and a chin strap, compared to cast iron. You have to wail on an anvil for days at a time to make one. It has to have a hinge. Wildly different. A lot easier to produce, and I would go so far to say that after the first couple iterations are a lot more protective than some of the medieval helmets. And we can get onto that in a whole other video. But basically what ends up happening is in 1842, the first pickelhaubes are put out. And by the end of 1842, lots and lots of units have pickelhaubes as their standard issue helmet. Now, the spike on the top, the thing that makes the pickelhaube pickle, is the fact that it lets the commanders see their soldiers in battle. It is a remnant of the shako. And you could say that the remnant of the shako is the super tall helmet, right? And then the spike on top is something else. And to that, I would say kind of yes. But you could also say that the super tall helmet piece is the super tall, felt piece of the shako, and then the spike on top replaces the like fuzzy spike on top of the shako. Could look at it either way, but either way, you can definitely see that the shako is still having a lasting effect on the pickelhaube. Still super tall, and you can still see it from forever away. That way you know where your troops are. Except this new variant of the pickelhaube isn't really that useful. It's super incredibly tall, and it weighs about as much as a shako, if not a little bit more. But one of the nice things about this helmet is that it doesn't soak in water. So a wet shako is going to weigh more than this metal pickelhaube. A dry shako might only weigh a couple parts of a pound, or a pound or two less than this helmet. Now, the other thing about this helmet is that this is still a time where cavalry plays a big part of each battle. So the spike is put on there in a way to deflect saber hits. If the saber is coming down as a guy coming down on you from a horse, the saber should hit the spike and bounce off. So that's one of the big reasons as to why there was a spike on top. Also, again, just the, cohesion of the unit and also the intimidation that comes with it. So there's that too. Now, Prussia makes this variant in 1860, and they go on this huge military campaign over in Europe. I mean, they are dominating Europe, not necessarily in the fact that they've conquered the Netherlands, they've conquered France, not necessarily like that. They have beat France though, and other nations start to see Prussia as this legitimate full nation that has weight to throw behind it. It needs to be looked at. And one of the things that they see Prussia for is these pickelhaubes, these spiked helmets, because it's revolutionary. Everybody else is in soft caps, and these guys show up with these weird metal caps that are actually protecting their troops with something. Now, the idea of the pickelhaube isn't necessarily to defend from bullets. It is designed to protect from shrapnel mostly. It is also designed to protect from saber hits, but it offers more protection than a soft cap. So, as you go through the decades, you start to see the United States and the United Kingdom pick up on this, and they put their own twists on these pickelhaubes, and they play a very minor role in the history of both nations. The United Kingdom puts spikes like the pickelhaube on the front of their pith helmets. Sometimes you'll see front plates. And then they have this home defense helmet that looks a little bit like a pickelhaube. That could get the front plate, the chin strap, the visor, spike, but it's not exactly like it. It's like your weird memory of what a pickelhaube would be like if I asked you to describe it 5 years from now. You might be able to describe some of it, but not all the way. It's weird. Now, the United States also picks up on this pickelhaube, and it plays a very minor role in military history. And this is why I had to re-record this video, because I managed to, thanks to my grandma, pick up a extremely rare 1881 model spiked helmet from the U.S. Army. This was given out to U.S. Army and U.S. Marine Corps units very selectively from 1881 all the way through around 1898 or 1902, best I could find. They played a very minor role because we weren't really in any active wars at the time that these would have been in. And really, they were only given out to very select units. They were also given out to police and I think firefighters as well. But there's really not a whole lot on them because they played just such a minor role. It was a kind of desolate time in our history for warfare, and the units that did fight weren't fighting in these especially. But you can see how much of an influence the Prussians had on this helmet. You can see it's got the same, super shiny spike on the top, and it's got the front plate denoting where it's from. This one's the 65th Infantry Regiment from New York. Now, post-Civil War, this regiment was disbanded, and then it was put back up, and then it was disbanded again in 1898. So somewhere between 81 and 98, this helmet was used in that unit. I'm working on it, but It's really fascinating. You can see that the visors are also influenced, and nations really get influenced by this helmet because it really is that good. It really does play that much of an influence across these nations. Because instead of having a felt cap that doesn't protect your soldiers at all, it actually does something for your soldiers. It is providing not just a easy way to identify your soldiers, but it's helping with shrapnel injuries. It is helping with saber hits. It is helping enough that people are recognizing that and putting that into their units. Now, it doesn't really catch with the US. We still have soft caps, and we stay in the soft caps until World War One. We have this very isolationist policy. We don't want to get involved in what's happening over there. That's their problem, not our problem. And then by the time World War One rolls around and we enter it, we realize we need helmets. But by that time, we already knew how to make steel pot helmets, and we move on with that. We get our helmets. And that pickelhaube kind of gets phased out. The United Kingdom doesn't really do that either. We make them in enough of a margin that it would be put forth into infantry units, but still plays a very cool but small important role in both of those nations' histories. Now, going back to the Prussians. In 1895, the Prussians make this helmet. This is the M95 pickelhaube. This is the most produced variant and was the standard issue helmet for all infantry soldiers until 1915. Millions of these were made. This is the helmet. And you can see just how refined it is compared to, that initial variant in 1884. The size has decreased drastically. It's gotten fatter and shorter, but you still have that front plate, the chin strap, the visors, and the spike. It's just they've realized what was efficient and what wasn't efficient, and now they've refined it to the point that it actually works pretty well. Now, it is good, it is fine until World War One rolls around. And once World War One rolls around, they kind of realize that this is a good helmet, but not for this type of fighting. And we're going to get into that. Now, before we get into that, we're going to look at the anatomy of this pickelhaube. And this image on the screen here describes it perfectly. This is, again, a M95 variant. You can tell because of just how short it is, but still prominent. So starting from the right side of the image, going up and then to the back, we have our chin strap. We have our helmet plate of the Wappen. That would change based off of where the helmet was made. When Prussia forms, they have all of these different states. Every state produces pickelhaubes in some variation and in some amount, and each one makes a different Wappen for the front that symbolizes where it was made from, which is really fascinating. It's a little small detail, but it's still really cool. So then you have your spike neck, which has ventilation holes into the helmet, which is revolutionary at the time. This is amazing. It's letting the soldiers breathe through their helmets. Then they have, obviously, the spike. We'll get into more about the spike in a minute. The neck ring, which provides support to the helmet in the rear. And then you have your neck guard in the back, which is, again, super nice, super cool. You have your cockades on the side, and the cockades could denote different things based off of which cockade was on there. And then you had your front visor, which is also extremely important. And that is the very rough anatomy of pickelhaube. There's not much more to it. If you really want to go into detail, you can look at the different type of spikes. You can look at the different types of cockades and the Wappens and the chin straps and the colors. You can get into it, but that's all you need to know for this. Now, at the outbreak of the war, the Germans realized pretty quickly that this helmet is good, this helmet is cool, but it's not what we need for this war because it is too shiny. It is too noticeable. Because when you start fighting in the trenches, you realize that you want to blend in with the trench. And when you are running across no man's land, you want to blend in as much as possible. So having a super shiny gold plate on the front doesn't necessarily convey, sneakiness. So they come out with these trench covers, which is just like a cover that covers the entire helmet. It's this dull, drab color just to blend in with the mud. And then you could paint the unit number on your hat, and it was good. It did its purpose. it made the, pickelhaubes a little sad. I think they were kind of stupid because I like the pickelhaubes and I think that they should have stayed in service more. But either way, they work for what's needed. Okay, I'm not refocus. So then in 1915, the Prussians come out with this, the M15 variant. Now this variant's a little bit beat up, but it is still a fascinating example of a 1915 variant. Now, these variants were almost identical to the 95 variant, but they featured a removable spike on the top here, which is incredibly good for if you are fighting in the trench, because you can take that spike off now and you've just removed that much height off of you. And when you are standing in a trench that is 6 feet tall and you are 5'11", you best believe that you'd want an extra inch taken off. That way you can stay just that much more hidden. And it was fine. They also were made out of cheaper materials, which meant that you could produce them for a lot less, which is important because Germany is really hurting now with the blockade and they can't get enough to make new helmets. So it's kind of hard to find these in the best of conditions because the materials are made, in a lot of a cheaper material. Now, they get rolled out. Units do see pickelhaubes from the 1915 variant, but a new helmet kind of takes over pretty quickly afterwards. And we'll talk about that in a second. But fascinating helmet. Now, really quickly, because this is just getting nitpicky on the history of the pickelhaube, you do have different types of spikes for different, uses and people. Like you have the standard spike for infantry, like what you just saw in the last helmet and all the other helmets that I've shown. You have much taller, more pronounced spikes for ceremony units and for Kaiser II, who, really needs a larger spike to compensate. So he gets a ludicrously large, comically large helmet. You would have round balls like the image here for artillery, and then you would have horsehair sometimes for cavalry. Super tall, ornate horsehair, way, way over the top. And you really wouldn't see horsehairs or the ceremony pickelhaubes in trenches or anywhere near the trenches because that would give you away from actual miles away, and that's not what you want in a war, especially when the artillery and the guns can shoot far enough to hit you. But you might see, a round ball for artillery in the trenches every once in a while, and you definitely see just the standard, length spike. Now, I talked about how the M1915 replacement comes along, and they don't really see a whole lot of use because a new helmet takes over its place. And that is the M16 helmet. Very creative with the names, and that would be the Stahlhelm. And it is just better. That's it. It is just better. It is cheaper to make. It is easier to make. You have more protection with them. It's just better. But that does not mean it is cooler, and I will die on that hill because the pickelhaubes are the coolest helmets to ever be made on the face of the planet. So with pickelhaubes, the pickelhaube would kind of come down to just around your ear, like maybe just around here, kind of around here. It would rest on top of your head. And when you're fighting in the trenches and there's artillery going off everywhere, and the majority of people that get injured in war are by artillery, it's kind of not ideal for your troops. But this new Stahlhelm comes out and it comes down to here on the ears, and it comes all the way down kind of towards the back of your neck. It really protects your head, and it has ventilation holes on the side that, let a attachment come down in front of your eyes. It's good. It is a really good helmet. In fact, it is such a good helmet that helmets today are still influenced by that one Stahlhelm helmet. And the Germans used the Stahlhelms from World War I, middle interwar years, World War II. They use those suckers all the time. So these pickelhaubes come out in 1916. Frontline unit gets them first, especially if you are over on the Western Front, and then the Eastern Front gets them a little bit later. And by late 1916, pretty much all units across the German army are in these Stahlhelms. Pickelhaubes are just for the reserve units. They are used extensively in ceremony units all the way until the end of the war. All the way. And sadly, that's where the pickelhaube in, combat armies ends. So after the war, you have soldiers that are sitting in Europe. They've been fighting for 4 years or fighting for 1 year if you're an American. And they want to bring something back home. They want a trophy. This is a very common element of every single war ever fought. There's always the most desired war trophy in every single war. Maybe it's Saddam Hussein's golden guns. Maybe it is, a Nazi officer's pistol or his dagger. In World War I, the war trophy was a pickelhaube. And the fancier and more ornate it was, the more a soldier wanted it. By the end of the war, a couple of years afterwards, when all the troops have come back home, there are more pickelhaubes in the US than there are in Europe, because we took so many of them. In fact, we took 12,000 of them, and we displayed them in New York in this image here as a show of pride in 1919. This photograph shows 12,000 pickelhaubes in one pyramid as a "we won, y'all suck." And that's kind of it for the pickelhaubes. The influence isn't quite done. You have nations like Sweden and Chile today that still use pickelhaubes in ceremony units. If you look up, Swedish band, you can probably find a photo of them wearing these super shiny, like extremely over-the-top pickelhaubes that would not be used anywhere near an active war zone. But some nations still use them very ceremoniously, and sadly, that is where the pickelhaube story ends, which sucks because it totally deserves more respect. We should totally bring it back. I think we should bring it back today. Standard issue. Yeah, so if you enjoyed this episode, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Have a good day.